Welcome to the screencast for The Value of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. Now, this article is pretty short. It's an excerpt from a longer work, both the chapter in the book, called The Problems of Philosophy. So, in this section, Bertrand Russell asks why we should do philosophy. We learned a little bit about what philosophy is in the last article. So now we're going to think a little bit more about why we should practice it at all. First, though, Bertrand Russell was an interesting philosopher and man. He lived almost 100 years. He's an Englishman. He won the Nobel Prize. He was a political activist, a very well-regarded philosopher and logician. He was something that we don't have too many of anymore. We have a few. Public intellectual. He didn't stay within academia and write and publish and lecture. He did his best to live in line with his morality, with his idea of what is right and what is wrong, and use it to do as much as he could to improve public knowledge and life. He lived from 1872 to 1970. He almost taught at CUNY. He was appointed to the City College of New York, but due to his political activism, he was a pacifist. He was deemed, quote, morally unfit to teach for CUNY, so he never quite did. And this tiny little section, 3 pages or so, is taken from a book called The Problems of Philosophy, which is still really widely read by both people in academics and by the general public alike. So we're going to look at a really short excerpt of why he, or how he argues that philosophy is important to human life. So what does it mean to have a good life? He admits right off the bat that we all understand what physical science is. The physical sciences are important to human life. It leads to practical benefits. So we get medicine and other medical treatments, and we get technology, computers, cars, x-ray machines, weather predictions, televisions. That stuff's pretty obvious. It hits practical things that people materially have a better life because they exist. They're not necessarily the most basic needs, but they are in service of our physical needs. And of course, the rest of the physical needs, everybody knows that you have to have those covered in order to have a good life. You have to have water and food, you have to have shelter, you have to have clothes, you have to have security and freedom from violence. But Russell asks you to imagine a world where everyone's physical needs are met. Like a Star Trek world. There's no starvation, there's no war, there's no poverty. If this was the case, and it was just all of our barest physical needs met, would everybody have good lives? And of course, Russell says no. Those are the goods of the body, and the goods of the mind are at least as important as the goods of the body. But what are the goods of the mind? Well, just keep this in mind as Russell gives us his definition of philosophy. And this is on the top of page 14. He says, just like any other field, a medical field aims at medical knowledge. Meteorological field aims at knowledge about the weather or planetary climate. So, like all fields, philosophy aims at knowledge, but not quite the same kind of knowledge. Philosophical knowledge gives unity and a system to the whole entire body of the sciences. So, organizational in a way. The kind that which results from a critical examination of the grounds of our convictions, our prejudices, and our beliefs. So again, we all have convictions, prejudices, and beliefs. And all the grounds mean are the things that those beliefs are based on. It definitely doesn't give us concrete knowledge, the way that physics or biology or chemistry do. So what kind of knowledge does it give us? Uncertain knowledge. And that sounds a little nuts, right? But if we take a look at Russell's way of phrasing it, we'll get a little bit of clarity on what he means. He's a very eloquent writer, so I put long quotes up here for you. And I even had to skip some of them that are just as compelling. So this uncertain knowledge that we get is about, again, those big questions that we keep running back into. And the way he puts it are, does the entire universe have any plan or purpose? Or is it just accidental, a fortuitous concourse of atoms? Is consciousness, what we have, self-awareness, a permanent part of the universe, giving hope to the indefinite growth of wisdom? Or is it a transitory accident on a small planet in which life must ultimately become impossible? What about good and evil? Are they important to only us? Or is there a larger scope in the universe where good and evil play a role? And that uncertainty, that knowledge that doesn't give us a certain truth, is a key part of the value of philosophy. He says on pages 14 to 15, the man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or nation, and from the convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation or consent of his deliberate reason. To such a man, the world tends to become definite, finite, obvious. Common objects rouse no questions, and unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. As soon as we begin to philosophize, on the contrary, we find that even the most everyday things lead us to problems which will have only very incomplete answers. Philosophy, though unable to tell us with any certainty what the true answer to the doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free us from the tyranny of custom. Thus, while diminishing our feeling of certainty as to what things are, it greatly increases our knowledge as to what they may be. It removes the arrogant dogmatism of those who have never traveled into the region of liberating doubt, and keeps alive our sense of wonder by showing us familiar things in an unfamiliar aspect. So, to sum up, he says that the value in philosophy is because it liberates the way we think, because it frees us. The only way to truly be free is to figure out all of those beliefs we just absorbed and look at the possibilities. He's saying that someone who only concentrated on the goods of the body would only ever receive a small sliver or subsection of the possibility of knowledge that's out there. So I always like to think of examples. If you happen to be born, say, 500 years ago and in China, what would your most core values, beliefs, and convictions be? How would they be different and how would they be the same to the ones that you have today? To start, you probably would have been raised in a different religious context. You would have been raised in a different context as to what it means to be a good child to your parents, a good member of your community. How would you choose your job would be a lot different. Your family, your future spouse, how you would raise your children. You would have these definite, finite knowledge about what is the right and wrong way to do these things. And just like you would have been confined 500 years ago in China, you're confined today if you never liberate yourself by using philosophy as a tool to enlarge your possibilities. He also says, right at the very end on page 15, the greatness of the objects we contemplate themselves will enlarge us as human beings. So again, when we think about meaning and plan and consciousness, we're elevating ourselves by the loftiness of the topics themselves.